this film, where we're concentrating on the very early life of the Virgin Mary, we're going to look at her presentation in the temple by her parents at a very young age, and then we're going to look at her betrothal and her marriage. And we're going to start with this very small 10th century ivory, which was probably carved in Constantinople. And because it is so small, I've asked them to bring it here to the conservation department at the Bode Museum so that we can have a closer look. The scene that we're looking at apparently occurred when the Virgin Mary was only 3 years old. And her parents, as you can see standing here, are Joachim and Anna, have brought the Virgin to the temple in thanksgiving. They were for many years childless, and they were delighted when they found out that they would conceive a child. And so they bring her to the temple to consecrate her to God. In this work, you'll notice there's also really interesting Greek inscription here at the top, and it translates as the Holy of Holies.
That, of course, is a description of a part of the temple building itself, as well as actually being a quotation from the New Testament, one of the letters in the New Testament, the letter to Hebrews, which speaks of how God wanted there to be a place on earth of maximum holiness. And that was the innermost sanctuary of the temple building, known as the Holy of Holies, where usually only the high priest could go. But I think that Mary herself is being equated with that place of holiness on earth. It's now her body. And the identification between her and the temple is very strongly reinforced by this apocryphal story. So although it's not in the Bible, it's theologically very meaningful and rich, because the Holy of Holies was the place where what was called the Ark of the Covenant used to be kept. That's a wooden box, but beautifully ornate. It's described in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. It was originally the place where the two tablets, the carved stone tablets of the law given to Moses by God, were kept. Mm-hmm. And it was thought by the ancient Jewish people that God's presence rested above the ark, and it dwells there in the temple. So Mary, in entering the temple, is almost a new ark of the covenant, because she too is a place where the divine presence is going to rest. She's going to be a place of that presence. And she's going to be inside this temple, in this Holy of Holies, as a Holy of Holies, for quite a long time, isn't she?
Yes, in the apocryphal accounts, they describe her residing there and actually studying in the temple until she's about 12 or 14, at least until she's a marriageable age, is how she is described. It's so interesting how you're describing the Virgin both at the temple, and here we see her at the threshold at the temple. She's being greeted by the high priest, but actually you describe her as the temple or the Ark of the Covenant herself. And I think that's also reinforced by this composition. You'll see she's not only represented there, but she's also this teeny little figure above, where she's seated in this arch-shaped piece of architecture. And what's missing from this composition, but what would have originally been up here, would be the figure of an angel. And if we go back to these apocryphal sources, we read that for those years that she resided in the temple, she was sustained, she was fed by the bread of angels. So here we would have had an angel coming down, swooping down and feeding her bread. The same apocryphal sources tell us that when she reached this marriageable age, she was then escorted from the temple and she was given to Joseph in marriage. And that's going to be the subject of the second object we're going to look at in this film. So we've just moved from a 10th century Byzantine ivory, and now we're moving forward in time, and we've moved to the Netherlands. So we're looking at this carved work in oak, probably made around 1490 or 1500 by a northern Netherlandish artist. We don't know specifically who. And what we're looking at is a scene that is often described as either a betrothal or a marriage of the Virgin Mary to Joseph. And you can see this small carving probably was part of a much larger carved altarpiece. So we can imagine here that this scene may have originally formed part of a series from the life of the Virgin.
So much of the early life of the Virgin Mary is the stuff of legend. It's written in legendary form. It's not in the Bible itself. Although the marriage of the Virgin to Joseph isn't described in the Bible, the first time we do meet her in terms of her life story is a mention in Luke's Gospel of the fact that she was living in Nazareth and that she was betrothed to a man called Joseph. So this is, if you like, the point where there's a confluence between all of those legendary stories and the scriptural text itself, just that short little verse in which so much is implied.
What's interesting, if you go back to any of the written sources on this subject, this event, this marriage, is alluded to, but the actual ceremony itself is not described. And that's left up to artists to imagine. And this artist clearly has drawn on a much older and ancient tradition, a marriage tradition, in which the hands of the two betrothed are brought together. Those hands are now missing in this sculpture, but originally those hands would have been brought together by the high priest here. This should be, of course, a Jewish high priest, but you see in this representation, the high priest is dressed as a Christian bishop. He's wearing that bishop's mitre. So there's a degree of anachronism here. There's a going forward in time and reimagining this for a Christian context.
And it's a moment of promising. And I think that's really important, especially as we think perhaps of Joseph's role in this story, because we know that so much is going to be asked of him. He's going to go through a great deal of adversity, as is Mary and as is their child. And yet, the way that they will endure all of that is because of the faithfulness of their promise-keeping. Here we see them making this promise each to the other. And beyond that, we know the promise of God is active in their story. This is the way it's being presented in the Bible and in the legends around it. And it's God's promise and the faithfulness of that promise delivered by an angel that we're going to look at in our next film, which is all about the Annunciation to Mary.